Let's begin the very much anticipated part 2 of What If Ahsoka Did Tell Yoda about what Maul had said about Anakin's fate. Our story continues in the Maw on Sinkhole Station, where the Force-sensitive beings known as the Mindwalkers were simply living their lives unaware of the evil that was beyond the station and deeper into the black hole cluster. Suddenly, though, a massive boom strikes the station, causing it to shake violently. Everyone scrambles to their feet when all of a sudden, everything goes dark. Then, we hear a massive explosion come from outside the station as a massive hole was created in the ceiling of the station, causing the oxygen to be sucked into space, and more than several people along with it. The Mindwalkers were already afraid, but what came next was worse than death itself, as a mysterious creature suddenly came through the hole as quick as a flash and blending into the darkness. Then, the lights flicker on and off, briefly shining on a creature that looked like a pale-skinned woman with silky white hair, a smile that went from ear to ear filled with sharp teeth, tiny black eyes, and with long, slimy tentacles for fingers. Everyone screamed in fear as they desperately tried to find out what the heck this was. However, this was no mere creature. This was Abeloth, the dark side entity that had been imprisoned in this black hole cluster for hundreds of thousands of years, and she, after thousands upon thousands of years of gaining power for herself, was finally ready to escape her prison, laughing maniacally as she made everyone there suffer in ways that no mere mortal can imagine, taking their Force energy and subsequently using the Force to cause Sinkhole Station to explode upon exiting it. Abeloth then finally exits the black hole cluster, making her way to Centerpoint Station and brutally killing a member of the bug-like Killick species and pouring some of her Force energy into them before she shapeshifts herself into a mortal woman from thousands of years ago, and with the Killick, leaves the station on a nearby shuttle without anyone even taking so much as a second glance. She would then go to the world of Ahch-To and use the Force to call any Jedi close to the system. More than several Jedi would come, including Taron Malicos and Quinlan Vos. Anakin, Grand Master of the Jedi Order, feels a dark disturbance in the Force, as if the galaxy itself is crying out in terror and that chaos is soon on the horizon. Something that has not happened since the death of Darth Sidious himself. Luke, Leia, Ezra, and the rest of the Jedi feel this as well, and Baylan Skoll, now a Jedi Master, is sent to investigate the source of this disturbance. Anakin senses that more than several Jedi have been caught in the crossfire, and he intends to find out what exactly he is up against. Baylan agrees and then goes with his apprentice, Shin Hati, towards what they feel is the disturbance. What Anakin doesn't know, however, is that Baylan and Shin felt like this disturbance was calling to them. So, when Baylan and Shin get to Ahch-To, Abeloth kills them and possesses them, before a Venator jumps out of hyperspace, filled with Abeloth's possessed victims, ready to pick up Abeloth and her Jedi army. Meanwhile, on Alderaan, Han and Leia were on their honeymoon after having just been married after Anakin became Grand Master of the Order. They were sleeping peacefully in their hotel room when all of a sudden, a possessed Quinlan Vos attacks them, and Leia is suddenly forced to activate her lightsaber before a duel begins. Leia, due to her training under Ahsoka, is able to gain the upper hand over Quinlan, and he is swiftly defeated, but not before Quinlan shapeshifts into Abeloth and escapes. Han is shocked at what he sees, and Leia deduces that this was the great disturbance in the Force that she and the rest of the Jedi had felt earlier. Leia tells Han that they have to return to Coruscant, and they get into their ship, the Millennium Falcon, and jump into hyperspace. On Coruscant, Luke and his pregnant wife Mara Jade Skywalker were having a nice dinner with Padme, who was still the Chancellor of the Republic, when Anakin joins them. Anakin expresses that he is proud of the man that Luke had become, and that his unborn son was lucky to have a father such as Luke. Luke and Mara are appreciative of the compliments. However, this is when Han and Leia arrive, and Anakin feels it in the Force. Leia and Han burst into the dining room, and Anakin asks what is wrong. Han is the one to explain everything that had happened on Alderaan, and Leia expresses anger towards the situation. Han is also somewhat frustrated, but Anakin calms both of them down, explaining that he had sent 2 Jedi to take care of the threat. However, Anakin then feels in the Force that he had made a grave mistake in trusting Baylan and Shin. The HoloNet then goes live, and the Skywalkers watch in horror as they learn that the planet of Tatooine was under attack by a Republic Venator, and that Jedi were participating in this attack. Padme, knowing that the clones were never discarded after the war for security reasons, is especially horrified by this, as firstly, this was Anakin's homeworld, and secondly, the Republic would never attack an Outer Rim planet unless there was a good reason. Anakin is also horrified at this attack because firstly, he knew that the Jedi would never do something like this. Secondly, he never authorized this attack, and would never authorize an attack like this, especially on his homeworld. And thirdly, this meant that many Jedi had presumably fallen to the dark side. With this, the Skywalkers deduce that the Venator in question was hijacked by someone or something that was specifically targeting the newly crowned Grand Master. An emergency council meeting is held on Tython, where Anakin attends only on hologram. The council, after feeling the presences of each Jedi involved in the attack through the Force, discover that they had not in fact fallen to the dark side, and they presumably deduce that someone or something was using a form of mind control against them. The council then decide to send a Jedi squadron alongside the clones to deal with the threat. Anakin agreeing to lead the mission himself, and tells the rest of the council that he was going to the Republic Senate building to meet with the Chancellor. On the way to the Senate building, Anakin finds Ezra, who tells him that he plans on marrying Sabine Wren. Anakin chuckles to himself just before placing a hand on Ezra's shoulder, just as Obi-Wan had done with him all those years ago, and tells Ezra that he was happy for him. He tells him to continue to pursue this attachment, but to not let it control him. Ezra bows in respect towards his master, and the two of them make their way to the Senate building. An emergency Senate meeting is also held, but Padme has a much more difficult time getting to the Senate building than usual, because many citizens were gathered around the Senate building in protest of the attack on Tatooine, thinking that the Republic had actually authorized the attack. As Padme tried to enter the building, obscenities were shouted, including a chant that said, "Death to the Republic," or vile phrases like, "Down with the Jedi." However, Padme gets in eventually and addresses the Senate. She explains everything to the senators, and seeing that she was beloved by the people and the senators, and that everyone knew about Padme's marriage to Anakin, whose homeworld was Tatooine, everyone was silent while she made her address. Padme calls for Anakin himself, who had just arrived at the Senate meeting, and also calls for the rest of the Jedi to help expose the culprit behind the attack, and to bring them to justice on behalf of the Republic. Anakin, having heard everything Padme had just said, agrees to do so, and he also addresses the Senate, promising that he would bring this threat down, and saying that he wanted every available Jedi on the scene immediately. Then, after the meeting is adjourned, Anakin, Luke, Mara, and Leia, alongside many other Jedi, including Ahsoka and Ezra, would prepare to get into 3 separate Venators in order to team up with the clone army for the first time in over 2 decades, with Anakin himself leading the mission. Before Anakin gets into his old Venator, Padme has a moment with her husband as she places her hands on his cheeks. She tells him that she loves him and asks him to protect their children and their future grandchild. Anakin, in turn, with tears in his eyes, promises to do so with his very life before getting into the Venator. Then, with Ahsoka by Anakin's side once again alongside Ezra, the fleet jumps into hyperspace for Tatooine. Meanwhile, on Tatooine, the Jedi and clones who were possessed by Abeloth, including Fox, Cody, and Gree, lay waste to the backwater world. Owen and Beru attempt to fight Abeloth and her forces, but when Owen lands a shot on Abeloth, she screams in agony, and in an incomprehensible display of the Force, fires start all over the planet as Abeloth let out a horrifying amount of Force energy that instantly destroyed anyone within a 3-mile radius, including Owen, Beru, and their daughter Shmi, who was named after Anakin's mother. Anyone further away instantly collapsed to the ground in agony as burnt sand turned into white-hot glass shards flew everywhere. Then, as the burst of Force light energy continued, Owen and Beru's hut is destroyed, and in its place, Abeloth used the Force to form a volcano, which at the end of Abeloth's outburst, she would detonate by use of the Force, destroying everything and anything that was in the path of the eruption. Anakin and his fleet jump out of hyperspace and are beyond horrified at the destruction that their enemy had caused. But they pressed forward anyway upon Anakin's command. When they land, the clones would instantly pull out their blasters as the Jedi would at the same time ignite their lightsabers. Rex, having been promoted to the position of general of the entire clone army after all these years of service, would participate in this battle under Anakin once more, ready to serve once again under his Jedi commander, saluting him before pulling out his blaster and entering the battle. Abeloth's forces see the Jedi and Republic coming for them, and they all prepare for battle before charging at their attackers. The clones under Abeloth's control would be dealt with easily by the Jedi and clones. However, the Jedi under Abeloth's control would be much more difficult to deal with. Anakin, whose power had only grown during the past 2 decades, would dominate the battlefield, killing many of his enemies, clones and Jedi alike, as Luke and Mara take on Quinlan Vos, and Leia and Ahsoka take on Shin Hati. Mara tries to get through to Quinlan, seeing as she had been trained under him. But, having been killed when Abeloth possessed him, Quinlan refused to listen, and after he is able to defeat Mara, Luke plunges his emerald green lightsaber through Quinlan, saving the lives of both his wife and his unborn son. Shin, having trained with one of the most skilled fighters in the Jedi Order, puts up a good fight, but Leia and Ahsoka are able to deal with Shin easily, and Ahsoka ultimately kills her. However, what happens next is worse than Ahsoka had imagined, as Abeloth shows up from behind Ahsoka. When Baylan and Anakin find each other in the battlefield, Anakin and Baylan have an epic, ferocious duel in which Anakin expresses that he had made a mistake in trusting Baylan with the mission. Baylan, having always been skeptical of Anakin, similarly to how Mace Windu was skeptical, attacks in a blind rage. But Anakin, having learned to control his emotions, is able to kill Baylan with relative ease. This was when a creepy yet loving female voice called out to Anakin, challenging him to battle. That was when Anakin looked behind him, and he saw Abeloth's horrifying sight, holding Ahsoka hostage as she introduced herself as the beloved Queen of the Stars and the mother of Mortis, here to take revenge on Anakin and his loved ones for the deaths of her immortal family. Anakin feels an immense cold just by being in her mere presence, and he feels the near limitless power of this monster. However, Anakin stands horrified as Abeloth lifts Ahsoka by use of the Force and plunges her tentacles through Ahsoka's mouth as Ahsoka attempts to scream in terror. And, just like all of her other victims, Ahsoka dies and is possessed by the Bringer of Chaos, before Ahsoka then attacks Anakin, who lifts his blade in order to block the attack. Anakin, believing that Ahsoka was somehow still alive, attempts to get through to her, tears in his eyes as he tells her to fight this monster that was inside of her. But Abeloth's grip on Ahsoka was too strong, and Anakin is forced to incapacitate her before he rushes Abeloth, angered at what she had done to his apprentice. The battle between Anakin and Abeloth was more intense and more ferocious than even Anakin's fight against Sidious more than 20 years before. In fact, it was so intense that the planet shook just because of how hard Anakin and Abeloth fought, and just because of the massive amount of power of both combatants. Boulders were thrown by both combatants. Lava was spewing from the planet via use of the Force, and lightsaber strikes were thrown by Anakin. Ezra, having dominated in the battlefield himself, attempts to help his master against Abeloth, but Abeloth uses a red form of Force lightning to knock Ezra out. Anakin sees this and is distracted by his rage, but Abeloth uses this to her advantage, and she is able to severely injure Anakin, resulting in a broken leg, a bloody nose, more than several broken ribs, and the loss of his cybernetic arm. Abeloth's attack was so powerful that it ended up ultimately destroying Anakin's lightsaber as soon as he hit the ground. From here, Abeloth is able to completely overwhelm the Jedi and Republic forces, killing everyone who wasn't able to escape her wrath, including Rex and even Wolf, and effectively leaving Anakin and Ezra among the last of the Jedi, and leaving Oppo as one of the last clones. Then, she overwhelms Leia, Luke, and Mara, before then taking them hostage as Anakin, still lying on the ground as a result of his injuries, sees this and is horrified, knowing that he wasn't able to keep his promise to Padme. Then, as Abeloth gets into her ship with Luke, Leia, and Mara in tow, Anakin closes his eyes, feeling the rage towards Abeloth for everything she's done, and then, after a moment, Anakin opens his eyes, a hateful yellow glow, as he looks towards Abeloth with an anger that he had not felt since Palpatine had killed Obi-Wan, and feeling the dark side of the Force flowing through him for the first time in over 2 decades, as he lets out a powerful Force scream while Abeloth ultimately escapes. Well, folks, that is part 2 of our story today. Do stay tuned for part 3 of our story, coming to you at this time next week. Again, do me a solid and cast your vote in the poll that I mentioned earlier. Let me know what other what-if ideas you have in the comments below. A huge thanks to all of you for more than 170, almost 180 subscribers. We're now officially on the road to 500 subscribers. It's a dream come true for me, as I keep saying, and I really do hope to keep doing this for you guys. So do subscribe if you're new, as it really does help me out. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss a thing. Follow my Instagram at Star Wars Red Wing. Thanks for watching. May the Force be with you, and I'll see y'all later.